Welcome to the Free Cities podcast. My name is Timothy Allen, and this is the official podcast of the Free Cities Foundation. Hello, and welcome to episode number 57 of the Free Cities podcast. Well, with Storm Pia raging in the background, I don't know whether you can hear it. I'll probably try and edit it out. And obviously today, it's only 2 days until Christmas. How are you feeling about that? In my house, the emotional intensity is truly palpable. I was speaking to the kids about it at the dinner table last night, funnily enough. My youngest is at this point now old enough to probably know that Father Christmas isn't real, but we've never actually talked about it. And last night at the dinner table, it came up and we had our first open conversation about the fact that Father Christmas is, well, me, basically. Anyway, I ended up explaining to them, and this is true. This isn't me just saying this. I'm a 52-year-old bloke, and I still feel the magic and excitement in the pit of my stomach after all these years. And I think, and we kind of agreed upon this at the table, that your job as a parent probably should be to try and lay a solid foundation to the fantasy when your kids are small, and then it will last a lifetime. Certainly it did in my case. And we've tried our hardest, at least to the point of one year I remember climbing a ladder outside the house up to the top floor of our house, and I jingled some bells outside the kids' window while they were all tucked up in bed. They didn't have a clue. They apparently, I've spoken to them about it in later life. I'm sure they did. Anyway, I digress. Back to the show. And I suppose I should give you this week a Christmas special, shouldn't I? Well, okay. I've been holding on to this one specifically for this occasion because out of all the people I speak to, I really do enjoy my conversations with Joe Quirk. First time I met him was at Liberty in Our Lifetime 2 years ago, not last year, the year before, when I interviewed him for a film we were making. And back then it was obvious he's a great orator and overall highly interesting guy. Anyway, this conversation is certainly light-hearted in parts and serious in others. Obviously we talk about seasteading. Joe is the president of the Seasteading Institute and extremely knowledgeable on the subject. From who else could I learn new words such as flotel, coralcrete, Aquapreneurs, and seavilisation? See what they did there? And if you listen to this pod, you'll know how much I love new words. I really do. Anyway, enjoy the chat, and in particular enjoyed Joe's takes on the world. And I hope that you all have a very wonderful Christmas, if that is something that you are choosing to celebrate over the coming days. If not, 2024 is just around the corner, and I'll be honest with you, my spidey senses are tingling. It's going to be a big year next year, and that may be for both the better and for the worse, I suspect. I suppose the plan going forward would be to know thyself, as they say, and just keep showing up and doing your thing. If you do that, pretty sure everything will work out just fine. Right now, though, and for possibly definitely for the penultimate time this year, I will, in the time-honoured tradition of this podcast, say to you, please, just sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Joe Quirk. I've got no agenda other than obviously talking about seasteading. I have to talk about your previous life as another or kind of author, because I was just looking through your list of books that you've written, and it's a real, talk about a diverse selection of books. I thought it was quite interesting. And when I look at the books you wrote before as well, I wonder how you suddenly fell into the seasteading world and then stayed there. It's kind of like that's the end of the line, isn't it? With the books. When I look at it, well, look,
I can explain it.
Well, okay. Well, can I just because I don't know how many people know that in this world that you wrote all these kind of books. Is that common knowledge?
I don't think it is common knowledge. I reinvent myself and get a new audience over and over.
Can I just read out your list
Sure.
of books, because it is quite funny actually. Right. So we've got Ultimate Rush, which is a rollerblading messenger caught in an illegal insider trading ring. Right. Then It's Not You, It's Biology, The Science of Love, Sex and Relationships. I mean, that's quite a jump already. Which was originally titled Sperm Are From Men, Eggs Are From Women, The Real Reason Men and Women Are Different. Brilliant. Then we've got, Exalt, which tells the story of love, death and hope among a community of hang gliders. That's brilliant, right? So
You laugh at the only one that's not a comedy.
no, but the story, I just love the way, I just copied this off the internet. I don't even know where it came from. It's the way it writes it. Exalt tells the story of love, death and hope among a community of hang gliders. Kind of added on the end. Then we've got Call to the Rescue, the story of Marine Mammal Centre. The Marine Mammal Centre, obviously. And then, since 2014, Seasteading. And your Seasteading book, which also has a brilliant title, How Floating Nations Will Restore the Environment, Enrich the Poor, Cure the Sick, and Liberate Humanity from Politicians. Did I get them all there? Are there any others?
I've also ghostwritten some books that are very successful that I can't talk about.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah.
That's even better. So come on then. How do you go from strange sort of like novels to sort of like a kind of evolutionary psychology manual to then, the final boss appears to be seasteading, because you haven't written anything else. Well, maybe you have as a ghostwriter. I don't know, but
I'm almost finished with the next book about Chad and Nadia, the first seasteaders, and the crazy manhunt.
right. But you've stopped at seasteading, so I presume you've found your well, what would it be? Nemesis, maybe. I don't know what you call that in writing. But
I think I found my passion and my mission, and because I think it's something worth convincing people of. But yes, it sounds, my series of books sounds zany, but there's an intellectual development going through that whole thing.
Oh yeah, go on.
Well, I could start with It's Not You, It's Biology. I could tell a lot of stories about each book. I could start at the beginning, or we could talk about how sperm are from men, eggs are from women leads to seasteading.
I'd like that actually, because I'm a big fan of evolutionary psychology. I love listening to that. I didn't really come across it until the last few years. Really, it's become popularized, hasn't it? Really, this idea that there's evolution. Well, it's just become popularized. Even Jordan Peterson,
Right.
People like that have really pushed it into the mainstream. So yeah, come on then. What's the connection?
So yeah, I got in early. I realized this stuff was going to get popularized. And I was a fiction writer, and what I do is every time I write a book, I completely alienate that audience and reinvent myself and get a different voice and go find a different audience. So there's been arguments online about the different Joe Quirks and stop confusing them. And I eventually had to write a bio that it's all the same guy, actually.
But wait a minute, how have you turned off your readers then? What is it about your style of writing that alienates your readers?
Well, when people love a book and then they love an author, they want to go back and get more of the same thing.
Right.
And then they find out I do something completely different. Completely different. I mean, every book is complete. I'm kind of proud of the fact that people say you can't tell it's the same writer.
No, I couldn't. The only reason I thought it was unusual is because I assume there's not many Joe Quirks around. I mean, but I didn't think, I thought, oh, there's another Joe Quirk. That's funny.
Yeah, there's only one.
Right.
It's all the same guy. And I guess I'm kind of a voicist. I don't just have a style and write. I figure out what the voice to tell a certain kind of story is. So I've done fiction, I've done nonfiction, I've ghostwritten a memoir. And right now I'm writing a book that's entirely in the voices of the characters. What real people said, taken straight from transcripts of what they said, and I interleave the transcripts. So once again, I'm writing a book that's completely different from all the others. But how does writing about this evolutionary psychology of sex lead to seasteading?
Yes.
Well, very early, I started reading scientific studies about human behavior, and I discovered evolutionary biology before it became popularized. And I just became addicted to it. And it was before the internet, really. So I would get up every day and I'd walk to UC Berkeley campus and I'd print out studies. And I'd read the studies and go all the way deep into them and look at the graphs. And I found it illuminated human behavior so much more sublimely than any psychology or any Aristotle, anything I'd ever read. And I said, man, so I was, I would be in a bar explaining to people like, man, did you know that there's a strong correlation between female promiscuity and the size of the male testicles among all primates? And
really?
That's chapter 2.
The bigger the balls, the more promiscuous the woman that's near the balls.
Yes,
really.
And this is among large. I do the correlation among large apes.
Wow. So
the way I sold this to publishers is I'm like, okay, here's the abstract. Sounds pretty science speaky, doesn't it? Well, here's how I translate that into English. Notice how it's automatically funny. I want to write a book in the voice of a guy who's read these studies and is just going to explain it to people. But it's a humor book, so it makes you laugh. So a lot of the things you discover reading this, it doesn't just illuminate what's so wonderful about us, it illuminates what's Machiavellian and cynical about it all. I just found it so mind-blowing that human emotions, evolved. That if you think of emotions as instincts, and instincts come from evolution, evolution is won by animals best at getting their genes into the next generation. And then you realize that men and women have two different ways of getting their genes into the next generation. Getting pregnant and getting somebody else pregnant are two very different strategies. And to the extent men and women have the same interest in passing on their genes, their emotions are gonna evolve to be in harmony. Finding children cute, getting aroused, all this kind of caring about status, all that. But to the extent men and women have two different ways of passing on their genes, their emotions are going to evolve to be in conflict. So I kind of take it from there, and I use humor to slip in all these harsh truths about reality. And the book has been translated into, it's 19 languages at this point.
Amazing.
So I really came to understand that the most powerful force for evolution, for progress in the world, and for design is evolution. So this microphone I'm looking at right now basically evolved. There's no one person in charge of designing it. There's been a variation of a huge amount of forms. Distributed people select for the best. And over time, we get this marvelous microphone that's working so well that nobody can make from scratch. So it's kind of like a global brain creates it. At some point, I was exposed to reason and evidence and realized the libertarians win the arguments, and became converted to that. But I came to realize that governments can't really undergo variation and selection, because variation would be a war or a revolution, too much damage. And so governments don't evolve. I can tell you the story of how I came to seasteading. So I was on a cruise ship. And I noticed it was the highest standard of living I'd ever experienced. I was living like a very wealthy person with servants taking care of me. And I remember there was ice sculptures and there's infinite marvelous food. And I was like, why is this cheaper than the coastal hotel I stayed in the night before? I don't get it. And instead of enjoying myself on the cruise ship, I was walking around trying to do back of the napkin calculations saying, okay, this thing's probably cost about $500 million. There's this many people on it. It costs, how much does it cost to run every day? I don't understand how this thing makes a profit. It must be some kind of tax play. I don't know what it is. What is that flag? I guess that's a Panama flag. I didn't understand why the floating city was so much better and cheaper than any city I'd ever been in before. 6 weeks later, I was at my 10th Burning Man.
Really?
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
Was this the year I don't know what it was, 2011?
Wow. Do you still go?
No, I went to a total of 16 and finally burned out on it, finally grew up. But Burning Man is fascinating because it's basically a startup society in a flat, featureless desert that lasts a week or two. And then every year it takes itself apart, disassembles, goes away, and then you start up again 2 weeks later. And every year the press report says, Burning Man is now ruined. There's an insurmountable crisis. 1 year it was people are throwing solid things into the porta potties. It's causing the porta potties to get clogged. And the porta potty companies, it's clogged up their vacuums and cost them a lot of money, and they're going to pull out of Burning Man. And if we lose the porta potty people, we can't do Burning Man. You can't have 60,000 people with no porta potties. What are we going to do? It's like, oh my God, this could be the end of Burning Man. And then the city gets taken apart, and then it's put up next year. All the porta potties work perfectly. The problems get solved. And then the next year we raised too much dust. How do you enforce a speed limit of 5 miles an hour for all these cars everywhere? Oh my God, there's a big crisis. We need to have a political argument. Well, I don't know. The city just gets taken apart, put up again, and then the problem gets solved. I noticed that the problems just all get solved in a distributed way without me ever needing to argue about it. So I was sort of talking out loud and saying, wouldn't it be interesting if we had more Burning Mans? What if this was going on all year long? What if we could have more startup societies in the middle of the desert? What kind of interesting ways of living together would we have? We'd probably discover all sorts of interesting things. And somebody said, well, you need to learn about seasteading. And I didn't really know what that was. So I was introduced to Patri Friedman at Burning Man, who described it to me very, very briefly. And because I'd just been on a cruise ship, I was like, yeah, I can understand why mankind would eventually move to the water. I think that's technologically realistic. I don't see why anyone would found a nonprofit to make it happen sooner than it would otherwise. And then I just kind of went home. And at some point, I noticed that the Seasteading logo is based on the Burning Man logo.
Is it?
Yes. It's the Burning Man logo with a cruise ship on the top of it. The Burning Man logo is a man holding his arms to the sky. The Seasteading logo is a man holding his arms to the sky, standing on water with a cruise ship on top of him. So when I noticed that, I said, why would a city in the desert inspire cities on the ocean? I was like, what was this called? Seascaping? And I started Googling it. And at some point, I don't remember when or how, I came across the argument that if you founded civilization on the water and city blocks and homes were modular and movable and could be moved about like a floating Venice, and you could move city blocks about, and you could hook up with other, you could choose the neighbors you wanted. You could essentially vote with your house. I realized, these would be like modular cruise ships that stay on the water forever, and they detach and reattach. And I realized this would be variation by governance providers and selection by residents. And variation and selection is the secret recipe for progress in all things. On the ocean, we would have evolution in governance. The problem is we just founded civilization on the wrong third of the planet. And because I'd been on cruise ships and I'd been on boats and I understood barges, and I'm like, this is completely doable. I don't think this is hard. I think it's easier than going to Mars. And look, the surveillance state is on the rise. The original version of the talk I was going to give at the Liberty in Our Lifetime conference was going to show all the reasons that's happening. Like, not only is Schwab and China and the World Bank, you name it, they're coming for your children, and your children are crying out for more of it. People are completely persuaded by monopoly governance. They're brainwashed in it. It's coming for us. It's coming for free people. It's coming fast. It's coming hard, and it's not hiding its agenda. So this is where I want to argue with all my colleagues, which is we don't want oases. We don't want one Prospera here. We don't want a dozen Prosperas there. We don't even want 6,000 special economic zones all over the world. It's not enough. We need to radically proliferate the alternative examples and completely outcompete the rise of the surveillance state with 100,000 better examples. It's the only way freedom can win, because they got the technology, they got the AI, they're already probably training it on the blockchain, and we're completely outnumbered, and it's coming fast. We need to do this like in the next couple of decades. I want to see hundreds of seasteads in the next couple of decades. In the next 50 years, I want there to be tens of thousands. I want these to be floating Hong Kongs all over the world. Most will probably fail, but the ones that succeed will be selected. And we have 2/3 of the planet to do this on. It's technologically doable. It's affordable. The people who get the bug are working on it now. We've inspired probably between 9 and a dozen seasteading companies in the last few years. And we need to just radically accelerate the creation of a technology for new societies that are mobile, and come to understand that founding civilization on a liquid is fundamentally different than founding it on land. And the reason governments are monopolies is because land is static. It's whoever has the military to control it is going to farm you and your resources.
It's funny, you're only the second person I've actually spoken in person to about seasteading, and the other one was Mason yesterday. And as someone who's, pretty open-minded, up until I spoke to Mason, I've always thought, yes, I understand the theory of seasteading, and it's a good idea, but in my mind, it was a bit of a fantasy. And then after speaking to Mason, I've now realized it's absolutely not a fantasy at all. It's very simply doable. In particular, like you say, the cruise ship example is a brilliant example, but also just oil platforms that are basically floating platforms. I didn't even realize that. I thought they were attached to the seafloor or something, but the technology is already there. And we can now build very large concrete structures to create harbors. Because the other thing I always thought of was, but what about when you get your first big storm? And you can isolate yourself from a storm quite easily now, I've realized. I never really thought it through. So it's funny. I'm in the movement. I'm open-minded, yet still I was thinking, it's not really a thing, until I actually I just hadn't dug under the surface a bit. But it's a really interesting realization to come to, that it's not just some little fantasy world or whatever,
Yeah. There's industries that are on the ocean right now. And in my talk, I showed a picture of one of the flotels. So, you have your oil rigs, you have guys working on them. A lot of oil you have to drill in very high wave conditions with storms. And they'll build flotels for people to live in, the workers, for weeks at a time, a month at a time. living there and then commuting by bridge to the oil rig.
Yeah, and they can't move, can they? It's not like they're not allowed to really move a lot. No,
They can be towed.
Well, yeah, but what I mean is, they need to be a solid structure that kind of sits still, even in large waves and stuff.
Yes.
Pretty much. I know there's movement, just like there is in a building, a tall building. But
yeah,
I would imagine that large waves would make these things, you'd be lying in your bed going backwards and forwards. But that's not the case in the slightest, is it?
No, the place where the waves happen is where the air-water interface. The wind causes waves at the surface, but down below, the water can be quite calm while there's a storm going on overhead. And if you could send a piling down and put tons of ballast at the bottom of it, well below the waves, it's like I call it a sea pillar. It's like sticking a pillar into land. And you can engineer for anything. And since a lot of the oil is in the North Sea or like terrible places like that, they have to engineer these things to be big and strong. Another thing that's on the sea is floating wind turbines that are gigantic and are on the same principle, the same spar principle. And just as land is very diverse, there's mountains, there's Sahara. In the same way, the oceans, there's like the North Sea and there's the doldrums near the equator. So if you can imagine the Earth going around the equator, there's like 1,000-mile wide band of calm turquoise seas for the most part, where waves generally don't get higher than 5 meters. And you have to engineer for the highest possible wave you're going to experience. And that's larger than any continent on Earth. So you can make a flotel at 1/100th the size and 1/1000th the cost. You can make instead of doing a wind turbine, put a little house on that thing, make it at 1/1000th the size and 1/10,000th the cost, and float it in calm equatorial seas. This 45% of the Earth's surface is completely unclaimed by any state. It's just that people don't focus on it. So when I first got hooked by this, which I think was about 13 years ago, as I was confronting the challenges, it's like, oh, well, how do you bring the price down? There's that challenge. How do you even engineer these things? There's that challenge. The ocean is very corrosive. How do you use the Wolf-Hilberth process to grow coralcrete on the seastead to encase it in a seashell so it'll last for centuries at sea? Because you need to be out there forever.
Did you just say coralcrete? Is that like concrete made out of coral?
Yeah, coralcrete.
Is that a new word, or is that?
It's a word that gets used. I use a lot of puns because seasteading is such a fundamentally way of thinking about how civilization works. I'm trying to snap you out of how you normally think about things. I want to use the word seavilisation. Yeah. It's so fundamentally different. We need a different word. An aquapreneur is going to be different than an entrepreneur. But one by one, the professionals and the experts have solved all those problems. As far as I'm concerned, the problems have all been solved, except for we just got to get a business going on the sea and prove that these things can pay for themselves. Most of the challenges have been knocked back. The one remaining challenge is the misunderstandings about it. That very intelligent people who could make this happen, it seems like a crazy, weird fantasy. And meanwhile, they're all interested in how we're going to go to Mars, which I think is crazy. I mean, the reason to go to Mars is, the Armageddon asteroid that might come and hit the Earth. But the chance of that happening in the next 10,000 years is very low. The chance of a complete monopoly surveillance state controlling the entire planet is coming fast in the lifetimes of our children. And that's the problem we need to solve.
What about, though, the problem I would say I still would have with it is the kind of the culture of seasteading, or the reality of living at sea. Mm-hmm. Because, like you say, very unusual thought. And when you look at the planet, you see there are a bunch of people that are very much seafaring, but it's quite a small group of people. My thought would be, even if this was a vast island, I mean, how vast are these things potentially? That's the thing. How similar to life on land am I to expect in a certain form of seastead?
Well, the market shall decide the size of any particular seastead as they develop. But I call it the blue frontier to compare it to the western frontier in North America. So at first, it's all these wacky pioneers with a big vision, trying to get away from the old world and do something different, who go out there and at great personal risks get a covered wagon and build a log cabin in the middle of nowhere. And then they set up farms and start having some food. And then some other people say, that seems like a good place to live, and come in. So you get those early adopters, which, we already got that with Chad and Nadia. And then other people right away, they had all sorts of people interested in joining their wacky community in the middle of the Andaman Sea. That would probably be happening right now if that hadn't been quashed by the Thai Navy. There'd probably be, 20 seasteads of eccentric people, and most of us saying, including me, I wouldn't want to live out there.
Maybe, sorry to butt in, maybe you should just quickly give us the 101 on the story, the Thai story. I've heard it myself before, but in this context, it's important, I think.
Yeah, so to prove that seasteads can be cheap and they can work, the first seastead named Ixtli, Xlii, after the Roman numeral 42.
Why 42? That
was a nerd check and you just failed. 42 is...
We're not talking a restaurant at the end of the world.
That's exactly what we're talking about. It's the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
I passed.
It's 42. You did pass, yeah. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
So they said seasteading is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. They built this thing. They lived on it for 2 months. And then out of nowhere, the Thai Navy went to the press and declared a death threat against them and sent battleships out to surround them. And they managed to scuttle and escape and lived a 10-day Hollywood movie that would make Tom Cruise jealous. And when I write this book...
right, you're writing about this. Sorry, yeah, I'm just put the two together. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm actually writing a book, and since I want to get it as close to the truth as possible, and I wasn't there during the manhunt. I was there just before it happened, and then I was there when they were rescued in Singapore. But they lived a crazy 10-day manhunt chase thing. And one of the ways I convey it, there are many ways to convey what this must have been like, but one is when the death threat happened, they got in a boat and they had a full fridge full of food. And over the next 10 days, they lost about 10 to 7 pounds between them with all the food they needed to eat and all the water they needed to drink and no place to walk on that boat. So they just sheer on stress and adrenaline and sleeplessness. I couldn't believe it when I saw them in Singapore. They had all lost all this weight. That's the level of stress they were experiencing.
What was their vessel then? Can you describe it? Their seastead. What was it?
The seastead. It looked like a lollipop. It was like it was the most bare bone things you could imagine. It was a spar. I call it a sea pillar, so land people know what that is. It was stable on the sea, and then they put a tiny little house on it. It's probably about as big as this room we're sitting in right now.
Which is about 25 feet across.
It was like 6 meters by 6 meters. That was the size of their thing. And a few years before that, I had a declaration for future seasteaders. I was imagining I was talking 25 years in the future, saying you can't say it's a seastead unless you pass the wine test. You can't have civilization if people are seasick. So you got to get a glass of wine, you got to pour that glass of wine, you got to show waves outside, and you got to look at your table and the wine glass isn't rippling. So I just kind of threw that out there. So Nadia waited until they were in a storm to whip out her cell phone and film high waves outside their door and then pan down and show a glass of wine on the table and it's not rippling. They friggin' passed the wine test.
Wow, and on a 6x6 platform.
A 6x6 platform on top of the key technology, which is, ocean people call it a spar, For the land folk, I call it a sea pillar. And all it is, the best way to talk about it is think of a wine bottle. Chad described it yesterday during his talk. A wine bottle, empty the wine, put rocks, 2 inches of rocks in the bottom of the bottle, put the cork back in the bottle, throw it in the water. The rocks drag it down, but the neck of the bottle sticks out of the water. And then make waves with your hand. And you'll be amazed that the bottle doesn't move. It remains stable. I made a little video myself in a swimming pool. I put a rubber ducky balanced on top of the cork. And I said, watch this. And it looks like, oh, is that sitting at the bottom of the pool? No, it's floating. It's not sitting on anything. And the rubber ducky is not falling off. You can go on YouTube and look at my video of that.
And how did they move then? When they were pursued, right?
Yeah, so they had a sailboat. So the seastead couldn't move unless it was towed.
Is that how it works? They drag it or they tow it and okay.
And it was anchored to the seafloor. So it was stable in one place. So it was a proof of concept. It wasn't even necessarily the first product. It was just a proof of concept. Proof it could be cheap, proof that it worked, proof that in that sea it's very flat and calm.
And did they build it themselves in Thailand, in a harbour somewhere or whatever?
It was built by the company Ocean Builders at very low cost.
And why Thailand then? Why did they choose to...
I think it's because the Andaman Sea is often described as a giant lake.
Right.
But actually, you can get the same thing in many places near the equator.
It's funny, when we were talking to Mason yesterday, I made a film years ago about the Bajau, the sea gypsies, and we lived on boats with them. And
really?
Yeah. It's a BBC film. You can see it. Human Planet it was called. It's one part episode of a thing just about the sea. We did different environments and stuff.
But before this manhunt happened, I was writing my first science fiction book. Well, not my first, about seasteading that opens with a boy from the Bajau Laut.
Oh yeah,
if that's how you pronounce it.
Well, Laut just means sea. Bajau is the tribal name. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I've looked into those people a lot. It's amazing.
Well, there's a few really fascinating facts about them as well. Do you know about the eyes focusing underwater and stuff?
Yes.
It's really interesting. And we followed this guy, his name was Sulbin, and he could hold his breath for about 5 minutes, using basically, breath exercises, the same that breath divers do in the Olympics and stuff. And you should watch it actually, because it's a really phenomenal bit of footage. Because I was down there when I was shooting stills, and we recorded him dive down, pick up a rock, and just walk along the bottom of the seabed with a harpoon and just shoot people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I might have seen it.
You probably have. I mean, I was there watching that with my own eyes. I've got some great photos of it as well. We were all in scuba gear, obviously.
Yeah. but it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
But they did talk about, I mean, one thing is they had no passports. They had no nationality. That was interesting in itself. But
they're
also
stateless.
Yeah. But also they did have the problem of bad seas. And they, because we flew around that whole area in a helicopter. We were off the coast of Sabah, and you could see these little communities everywhere. And a lot of them had stopped being nomadic and started positioning. They were farming seaweed and stuff, just on stilted huts out in the middle of nowhere. I've got some amazing pictures of just one hut on stilts, and literally for kilometers around, nothing else. It's just, and I often wondered what it's, because my issue as well, once again, with a 6x6 platform is, could I do that? No, I don't think I could. I don't think I could live on a 6x6 platform, even as an experiment. I think that would drive me kind of crazy. I don't know. Could you?
Probably not. But the CEO of Ocean Builders, his plan was to go out there and meditate alone on the thing for, I think, 3 months. So there's some people that like that kind of thing, solitude. I mean, Chad and Nadia will always tell you they loved it. Seeing the sunrise and the sunset, the infinite views, it's extraordinary. But then a bunch of people went to the website saying, yeah, I want the next one. I want to come join you out there. So this is how the community scales up. If they are in different places around the world and they're bigger, once you demonstrate that one little thing works, you can build others.
What's the end of the Thai story, though? How does it end?
It ends with an insane rescue into Singapore. They were ejected from every country, so countries weren't letting them in.
But for the reason that Thailand was after them, or that they just didn't have...
Thailand declared them a threat to Thai sovereignty.
Really?
And they tried to get into another country. They didn't let them in. They had to just do a mad dash through the most pirated waters in the world.
Into Singapore.
And go all the way to Singapore. And Singapore is basically a fortress. So how are they going to get into Singapore? I was in Singapore at that time, providing a diversion.
Put a load of flags up or something?
No, I was giving a speech to explain why seasteaders were in Singapore, because a secret rescue thing was arranged. And I'm not going to give away the whole book, but it's an extraordinary true story, the craziest manhunt you can imagine.
And what happened to the platform?
The Thai Navy confiscated it.
So they've got it.
They've got it, yeah.
And as I remember, they were within their rights to be in that. From a legal perspective, they were more than 12 miles off the coast, et cetera, et cetera. Is that right?
They were more than 12 miles off the coast, and they didn't commit a single crime.
Right.
Not even minor infractions.
So obviously that throws up a few interesting conundrums then for seasteaders, because, the whole Free Cities movement is in its infancy. And we're sorely lacking in good examples of things. But they're starting to happen now. You see Prospera having a legal battle with Honda and the Honduran government, et cetera, et cetera. And all these things add to our understanding of what's possible, what the best route forward is, blah, blah, blah. So what about seasteading now? You've shown that governments actually don't really care.
I think Thailand was a fluke. I don't think other governments are going to declare war on a floating house the size of a shack.
That's the best way to put it. Yes, correct.
That's the other thing I love about seasteading. If the land governments don't find cruise ships to be a threat, if the United States doesn't find the Cayman Islands to be a threat, if Malaysia doesn't find Singapore to be a threat, if socialist Venezuela doesn't find Trinidad and Tobago a threat, which is something like 6 miles offshore, I just don't think a seastead communities floating 12 miles out providing better services is going to provoke the immune system of the nation states. I think you could just be scaling these things up and slowly win people over.
It just made me remember something from my childhood, the Vietnamese boat people. Do you remember that? They were like refugees from Vietnam that were trying to find a place to live, and that everyone was turning them away. Is that the true story of it? I was a kid. It was in the news every day. That's the same kind of thing, although they're probably looking for residency on land. But there is a history of people not liking people arriving or being close by, who on boats or whatever,
Is there... The most interesting things in the world are not being filmed. And one of the things I find very interesting that there are... Ocean people will tell you that what you're talking about is already happening, which is people who live on catamarans, who are not getting taxed, who are staying quiet. They're part of a whole community. They go to the same ports. They trade with the same people. They do the same things, and they just they're kind of off the grid, living on boats. They're not. So the camera's pointed poor people that are fleeing bad governments and desperate to get into other places, because it's such a humanitarian tragedy. But there's people just living on boats that travel the world or stay in one place, and
that's got quite a lot of. I mean, if my Instagram feed is to go by, that kind of lifestyle is becoming idealized much more now. People are often talking about it, but also, and I know this from first-hand experience, there's a billionaire class that does it as well. In a much more sinister way, I think, in my opinion. But
you mean the yacht class?
Well, I mean, the proper yacht class, 60 people working on the boat and stuff, and doing the circuit each year, and all meeting up at the same events, and et cetera, et cetera. Because I have a connection with some people that work in that world, and I've often heard some quite... Well, the impression I get is that it's a lawless place. And when you're on a catamaran, like you say, it kind of is. But when you're an incredibly wealthy person, that means a whole different thing.
What do these things do?
I can't really say, because these are confidential conversations I've had with people. But like I say, I can sum it up as, for the same reason that if you're sailing a catamaran around the world, people leave you alone. And if you're on a yacht, which is basically the size of a cruise ship on the whole, people leave you alone. But everyone knows who you are, and all your friends do the same thing, and you all meet up in St. Kitts, and then everyone moves to there. But it's a way of living outside the system, which requires, I mean, proper wealth. Fuck you, money. But I think catamaran life that you see on TikTok is a version of that. It's just much more. This is like the blue collar version of it, I suppose you could say.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of income levels. You can get your yacht, or you can be the Bajau living on the sea as stateless. I mean, those are tragic stories, but there's a whole middle ground. And suppose you could stay out there forever and live on a permanent floating city or town or neighborhood or house. All I care about is something that's scalable. And as far as I'm concerned, what Chad and Nadia achieved is scalable. And there's waters like that all over the world. And now they're on the other side of the world doing it.
In the same, on a platform?
They have, Ocean Builders has some floating structures, and they're going to build a lot more.
Tell me, are Ocean Builders the only company making prototypes?
That's hard to say. I think they're the most advanced, but there are several companies building things and working on things. Many of them have ARC in the name. It's kind of interesting. A bunch of these people all independently put ARC in the name of their...
Makes sense.
But if you go to the Seasteading Institute website and you look at active projects, you can check out various of these projects.
So let's talk about prototypes then and working models. I remember actually last year in your talk, I didn't get to see yours this year because I was recording new episodes of this podcast, but you showed a bunch of examples. What stage is the community at the design and building process of anything to do with seasteading?
When the Seasteading Institute announced that we're going to develop the first classification society for seasteads, professionals in the ocean industry started taking us seriously and reaching out to volunteer to help. So what we're doing now is, with the guidance of some ocean industry people, we're deriving... Let me explain to you how we're going to make seasteads legal.
Okay.
So,
wait a minute. What's illegal about them, or what do you mean by that?
They're not defined in international law. So, if you're on the sea, you're required to have a flag. Otherwise, any country is free to board you, and you have no protection.
Right.
So you can get an open registry flag. You can flag with Liberia, and then you can sail your catamaran, or maybe not your catamaran, but your ship or your yacht.
Which is how cruise liners actually work, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's how they live outside the system in a way. I mean, it's a strange little quirk in maritime law, I think. When I heard about it, I was very surprised that you can just get a flag from anywhere and use that as a way to sort of insulate yourself from other nations in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a core part of the seasteading idea as well, isn't it, really? Something that sounds like it will probably never change, because the first time I heard about it, I thought, oh, they'll stop that. But then you realise they're doing it on cruise ships, and cruise ships aren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
So,
cruise ships are de facto self-governing floating cities.
I know, it's bizarre. This was the thing that clicked when I was talking to Mason. And I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it. And then added that to the fact that floating platforms are already an industrial reality and used a lot.
Yeah.
And you can't doubt that one day these things are going to exist, unless civilization collapses, because people are just going to make these things. Because we're good at making things. Humans are good at making things,
Imagine you're on a cruise ship. It's flagged in Panama. You're up in Alaska, waiting for a glacier to calve. Two drunks get in a fist fight. And in the mayhem, an old 90-year-old lady has a heart attack. You're not going to call 911 back to Panama. It's going to take the ambulance a long time to get there. Anything that happens has to be dealt with on that ship. Yeah. And what I just described happens every day on cruise ships. There are thousands of them. There are hundreds of them. And a population equivalent to Taiwan every year rides cruise ships.
That's given me a question. Is it too much of a stretch to say that between ports, they kind of have their own legal system on board?
I don't think that's a stretch. Functionally, that's what happens. So they have private police security.
They have a private security.
Right. So a captain is fundamentally a dictator when he's at sea. He's a tin pot dictator, and he has a lot of leeway to do whatever he wants. So he can lock you in the brig.
He even dresses up like a dictator as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, he kind of looks like one. Yeah. When I talk about this in my talks, I show a picture of a captain posing on his cruise ship. And it's kind of funny. He looks like a tin pot dictator.
He looks like Sacha Baron Cohen.
He's dressed like it, and he's got sunglasses. He doesn't realize he looks like that, but I do that to make the point. And then I ask, well, why doesn't this guy flog his passengers and keel haul his crew? What stops him from being a tyrant? And the answer is the customers have choice. You can go to another cruise line and put him out of business. And the same goes for employees. Employees can quit one cruise line and go to another as they get more experience. And there's no angels involved here. These are all people with human nature. I'm sure the guy would love to flog a couple of difficult passengers. But since the customers have choice and the employees have choice, the governance keeps improving. And it works so well that when you're sitting on a cruise ship, it doesn't occur to you to argue about who the alderman should be or who the governance should be or how you should vote or what the politics of the ship should be. You don't even find out who the captain is because you don't care. All you care is that everything works. And so no one argues about cruise ship politics. All they have to do is just say, I like something better, and I'm going to write a negative review online on Yahoo. And the cruise companies are going to panic about that. And the employees can go online and complain, this is not fair, that's not fair. And they complain about that too. So you're causing competition among all these floating cities, causes people to behave more civilly. So you can't get away with the same level of corruption. These societies are not perfect, but a lot of elderly people ride on these things. You can get sued. You got to have a helicopter to take people to a hospital.
And they have a lockup. They have a kind of jail on board. Do they kind of thing? I suppose
they have jails on board. You can call them that. They call them the brig, I guess.
Well,
they have medical centers, and the captain is free to just drop you off on an obscure island and abandon you.
Really?
Sure. They do it all the time.
Really? What, if someone's too rowdy, they just say, get up?
Yeah. We're leaving you here. Sue me in Bahamas court.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so you can be ejected from your floating city.
Okay, then. So why aren't residential boats a thing then? Or they probably are they?
They are. I just spoke on one. 13 years ago when I discovered seasteading, I was looking for precedents, and I immediately discovered the World, which is it's not a cruise ship. It's a big boat with condos on it of different sizes. And generally high net worth people are able to buy condos on this thing. And this thing travels the world. Constantly. And goes everywhere. So imagine, you're in Istanbul, you get off the ship, you go visit stuff, you come back, go to sleep, wake up, now Paris is on your doorstep. I'm summing it up, but and I always thought, man, this is the most advanced seastead in the world. In fact, it's a priestead. Wouldn't it be amazing, I said 13 years ago, if I could give a presentation on that ship and explain to those residents of that ship why they are the world's foremost seastead? Well, finally, like last month, my wife and I were sponsored to go on a 10-day cruise.
On that exact ship?
On that exact ship. And they asked me to give 3 talks, each an hour long. And I called them the talks, Seasteads Solve Political Conflict. The next talk was called Seasteads Heal the Ocean. And the last talk was called The 8 Great Moral Imperatives of Seasteading.
How did it go down?
It couldn't have gone better. Like the people who came to the talk came to all 3 talks. And then afterwards, I was supposed to make myself available for breakfast or whatever if someone wanted to talk to me. So I was talking to a lot of people on the ship about why they are seasteaders, and they were interested. It was wonderful. It was frustrating. They had very strict rules against fundraising, which I completely understand. And I was reminded of that repeatedly. There's lots of rules.
Yeah, I know.
But they are de facto self-governing, and it doesn't even occur to them.
So how do you sell? What is it about seasteading though that would interest them when they've already got that? Like, how do you convince them that a seastead's better? Is it more space, more sort of like
Well, why should there only be one world? What if there could be thousands of worlds?
Yeah, sure, but a seastead and a boat are going to be very different things, aren't they? I get the impression that a seastead might be more like an island.
Yeah.
Whereas a boat is more like, well, it's a bit like a mall or something, isn't it? It's like, you're all going up and down a lot and,
Yeah. I call it, a cruise ship is like going camping and taking your maul with you.
Right. Okay. Nowadays, they've got like fun fairs on them and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
They're incredible, really.
Yeah. This particular ship was very nice. It had restaurants. It had sizable apartments and small, not apartments, but condos, big ones, small ones. It's for all different kinds of people. But it's a fundamentally different technology. If you're floating in high waves on a boat, you're going to get seasick. You're going to be rocked all over the place. A ship stays stable by moving.
Oh, okay.
A seastead has to stay stable by holding still. So instead of moving through the waves, you have to go deep beneath the waves with ballast.
So, okay, what was the result then? Did you get any emails like a couple of weeks later from people saying?
One couple said, "Yeah, we want to be on your newsletter." I got word back that one of the guys, one of the people who came to my talks and asked lots of good questions, was in a port somewhere and announced them as seasteaders. But yeah, I don't. I put the bug in their heads, and we'll see where this goes.
Well, like I say, for me, there was I can see the evolution of my understanding of it, and there seems to be a kind of a hurdle that you need to get over. That was my case, because I understood the theory of it all, but for some reason I hadn't quite clicked that it was a reality. Maybe if you're already a seafaring person, you'll understand that that's more of a possibility. I don't know, but I suppose the other problem is it is still pretty out there. It's like people talking about going to Mars. We kind of know it's probably going to happen, but I don't know many people who are envisaging Mars, like thinking about it. Really, yeah. It's probably a very small subset of the world that is, and I think that's probably true of seasteaders.
The reason I'm newly enthusiastic and encouraged is I'm now discovering that people in the ocean industry have been watching us for a while and just sort of staying quiet. And it's not until we started moving on this classification project, which I still haven't explained.
Yeah, we should go back to that because I've got a big circle around prototypes here.
Yeah. So you have to have a flag.
Yeah.
If Chad and Nadia had a flag, the Thai Navy would have essentially been declaring war or it would have had an act of aggression against a country.
So that's the big lesson would you say that's the big understanding and learning from that whole experience?
Yes. I mean, we knew that ahead of time, but we didn't think anyone would care just about a proof of concept. They just wanted to make a proof of concept so they had something to talk about with Thailand. They were they were doing their best to work with Thailand. So what do you need? How do you get a flag? Well, you need to be defined as a vessel in international law. There is no category. There is no category of vessel known as a seastead. It's a completely different technology. It's sort of like a flotel. It's a lot like a spar. Like they know what all these things are there, but now suppose it's a home. Suppose it never comes into port. We want a flagging registry to recognize that as a unique thing. But you can't apply the rules of the giant spars. You can't apply the rules of the
flotels, though.
Yeah, $100 million flotel. That's not what it's going to be. It's going to be smaller than that. So we want to go to flagging registries and say, this is smaller, it stays on the sea, it's a lot like all these other things. You take the rules from these different structures and you put them together on a seastead. And now we have a new type of vessel and we want it to be recognized. Well, in order for that to happen, you're going to need, in order for the high-ranked flagging registries to recognize that, they're going to need marine insurance. They're going to need insurers to say, okay, we've done the actuarial analysis. We know the risk of this. It's in calm waters. It's small. We're willing to insure it. But the insurance company relies on classification societies. There are at least 50 of those operating on the ocean, basically classifying your boat, classifying your spar, classifying your flotel as different kinds of structures. But there is no seastead classification society. So what we're doing is so it goes, the classification society develops the safety rules for the seastead, puts their imprimatur on it, says, we declare this safe and we're staking our reputation on this. Then they hand that to the insurance company and the insurance company says, we're willing to insure this thing. Then the flagging registry, feeling reassured, says, okay, we'll put our flag on it. At that moment, 2/3 of the Earth's surface is open for seasteading.
Do they have to be a specific design, or can you just classify seastead in general and have a little bit of variance there?
Now, if you want to take a structure that already exists, like a barge or a flotel, you could do it that way. But we want to, I think most seasteaders of the sort that are being built that I know of, and if you want to go to the high seas and you want to be comfortable and stable, you need to build this new thing, which is basically a spar. Spars have been in use on the ocean since the Beatles broke up. I mean, spars are known technology. They've been around almost as long as I've been alive. But they're used for other things, not for someone to have a house on it and live on it. Though flotels use them. So we're talking about a type of thing that's never been on the sea. So we need to codify the safety rules for these things, get them insured, and declare a new type of vessel category. It's not a boat, it's not an oil platform, it's a seastead. And I want it to be called a seastead. And get a flagging registry to recognize that kind of vessel and flag it.
And what kind of time scale have you got on that, do you think?
As soon as possible.
How long does it take? I mean, bureaucracy like that, in my experience, can take a while.
Well, this is why seasteading is better than working with governments, because the insurers want to make money, the classification society wants to make money, and the flagging society wants to make money. So the flagging registries have shown more interest in seasteading than the governments have, because they're looking to get in ahead of what they see as the future movement of something new on the sea. So if they think, we have people from the industry who think seasteading might happen and is curious to talk to us about what we can do about making it happen.
And so you're pretty adamant then that the prototype that Ocean Builders has come up with, which adheres to that kind of pod on the top with a very long bottle shape on the bottom, that's going to be the one, do you think? You're going to see variations on that. You're not going to see something brand new.
I think we're going to see variations on that, and then very quickly that's going to inspire things that are brand new. Now, the other active seasteading projects are working on different models. And honestly, last night, Mason showed me the schema, the blueprints for what he's designing, which is a mobile seastead that could be categorized as a boat that could get there sooner, because he'd make an end run around efforts to create a new category of structure on the sea, he could just flag it as a boat. Yeah. I mean, well, there's like so many ways to go. What's wonderful about Seastead is that when people get interested in it, they're all pursuing these different ways to do it. So the evolution of different sorts of solutions is already happening.
Can you give me a rough list of the categories then? Because, for example, the Ocean Builder one, do they link together to form a bigger structure, for example?
Not at first.
But obviously that's a thought, is it?
It's a thought. Like, you want to get there. I imagine they could have 2 or 3, and you could have temporary gurney bridges connecting them. But in the waves, you'd want to pull. If there's a big storm, you'd probably want to put those gurneys in because you don't want seasteads banging together.
Yes.
But if you had a table with 4 spars, so you had like a city block. So there's multiple ways to get stability. One is for the spar to go deep down and have lots of ballast. Another way is for the seastead to be so wide, if it's wider than the period of the wave, then you either have to go deep or go very wide to get stability on the ocean.
And the other thing that Mason alerted me to was the fact that you can create a harbour at sea anywhere. You can just create a ginormous dome to insulate yourself from the outside world, and then you could just pop as many seasteads in there as you want. They don't even have the problem of waves at all, even if it doesn't matter. I mean, right. That seems to me to be one of the more realistic ideas, because engineering-wise, they're quite simple. To have floating harbours, which basically, then I think people would have more inclination, because you'd get boats as well, wouldn't you? You'd get a lot of sea people there, and that's kind of what you want, isn't it?
Yeah.
You want a community.
Yeah.
If you limit it to sort of these floating ocean builder ones,
yeah,
people have got to buy them and go and then get them there, and that's going to take a long time probably.
So when you talk about seasteading, I'm focused on the minimal viable product to get the first 1, 2, 3 going. But then soon after that, you might want to have a floating, imagine something in the shape of a horseshoe or a big giant U that floats sort of as a boat dock. It's also a natural wave breaker, so boats can go inside the U. And people have designed many versions of these. We have videos of different. We have a Singaporean who designed something like this. And then you can go in there and you could live on the inside the U, or you could live on the U itself. And then Mason is thinking we could just put a big dome over that thing.
Yeah. And
then you'd really be protected from the elements. But each of these steps has to be paid for. So we can talk about seasteading year 1, seasteading year 20. I'm imagining a big dome over a floating harbor being a couple steps down the line.
Yeah, like you say, it's an evolution, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm interested in the replicator. I'm interested in the thing that works, and if you do one of those, then the sky's the limit.
What kind of price is there on one of these ocean builder things, do you think?
Well, they're making them fancy and futuristic, and they're under $1 million generally. I think they're willing to take a loss on the first few because they're so dedicated to getting it started. But if you wanted to do a bare bones one, it'd probably be in the hundreds of thousands.
And how do you feel about the first few prototypes being a bit of a kind of tourist attraction? Does that matter? That's not against the kind of seasteading ethos?
Not at all.
Because that's probably what's going to happen, isn't it? There's going to be an Airbnb or something, isn't there?
We call it the CB&B. As a matter of fact, Titus Gable himself came up with that pun.
C as in SEA.
Yeah.
CB&B. Yeah.
I think that's the easiest. Again, if we're going to focus on the first thing that's going to work, we can always talk about big cities and all these big plans, but what's the first business that's going to work on the smallest possible, most affordable seastead? I think it's going to be something like a CB&B, a tourist attraction. People want to go and live on it, see the underwater room, scuba dive around it, get used to the lifestyle, a meditation retreat. And then we build up eventually to our medical research and affordable health care 12 miles off your coastal city.
Yeah, that's true as well. And I was thinking when we were, casinos, that those kind of industries that often come up against huge regulations on the mainland.
Yeah.
Floating, I mean, the harbour one as well, the floating harbour idea really inspires those kind of thoughts as well, because you can easily imagine quite quickly cruise ships will dock for a one night because it'll be an interesting thing to do in the beginning. Oh, look, let's go and check out the floating city.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not hard to bring in quite a lot of income, relatively quickly, I think, when you're a first mover. By the time people are living on them, it won't be a thing. But in the first instance, when it's a novelty, I could see that it's be quite an easy thing to A, publicise, and B, have people visit and generate some kind of income, because it's a curiosity, let's say.
I agree. I think that's how it would start. It would be, you can get in your ferry in 20 minutes. You can be 12 miles out, with a good motorboat. But that's shorter than my commute.
Yeah.
And you can go stay on this thing and get a feel for it and say, wow, those seasteaders really built this weird thing that really works. Isn't that cool? If you look at underwater hotels, where they just have one underwater room, people pay thousands of dollars a night to stay on those things.
I didn't even know they existed. Where are they?
They're on various coasts. There's about a dozen of them around the world that have an underwater hotel room. And it's like luxury staying, and you get to look out your window at the coral and the crabs and the fish and the.
And how do they work? Same principle.
They're not floating; they're just on the land, and then part of it goes down into the sea, and then you can stay beneath the sea.
So very close to the coast, very close to the shore. I mean,
literally on the shore. Now there is one in Dubai, which I've actually seen, that's actually floating, but I don't know if that gets used much.
That's a point. That's one thing I haven't thought about. The Middle East is the kind of place that's going to experiment with these things, and they've got some very flat seas there as well, haven't they?
They sure do.
Have they shown an interest in? Because that's the kind of part of the world that likes to do things like that, as a bit of a show off and a bit of a what we've done.
The answer is yes. Lots of countries in that area are looking to do things like this.
Yeah, floating hotels and stuff.
Yeah. They're not explicitly interested in seasteading.
No, but it's all, like you say, it's an evolution, isn't it?
But they're going to be developing the technology. Yeah.
Because they actually make islands, don't they, already? And that's a real ball ache compared to probably making a floating island, I would have thought.
Yeah. And the environmentalists get really upset at the pulling sand up from the beneath the sea to build false islands so you can put your mansion on there. But imagine seasteads. Every seastead you build increases the amount of life on the ocean. They're floating coral reefs. Yeah. And if they're going to last on the sea, you're going to need a coral reef on there.
Is there a climate change angle to this? Or do you not go there?
If you care about the ocean, you should live on a seastead.
What about rising ocean levels and stuff like that? Because presumably there's going to be more real estate.
You can imagine,
if we were to believe.
Kiribati is going beneath the seas. You can imagine people there transitioning into living on floating islands. Suppose the people of Kiribati, as their country goes away, they slowly transition to seasteads. Does that mean they're not a country anymore if all the land goes away?
Interesting.
If they're recognized as a floating country, now we have a precedent. And now suppose someone builds another one right next door. Are they also a floating country?
Are there people at the organization looking into these kind of things? Like if you were to create, is even the goal to create a new country, or is it something else? Is it just to be different, to be outside the system, to not be anything, to be stateless or whatever?
The goal is to bring a Silicon Valley sensibility to the problem of monopoly governance. And the more startups we can create, the more we'll discover better solutions for living together.
Whatever that is.
Whatever it is, and we can't imagine it.
But we have to experiment.
Just as I couldn't have imagined this microphone back in 1900. We have to allow evolution to work and provide solutions to us.
Have you got a personal prediction as someone who's obviously a bit of a deep thinker, especially in the sort of dark arts of evolutionary psychology? What do you think might be? What's your vision, say 50 years in the future? And what is your vision even with the current state of the world? Incorporate the state and what it's doing. How does all this stuff work out?
Well, I think the future is fundamentally unpredictable. It's black swans and golden swans from now on. The thing that happens that's going to matter is always the thing we're not talking about.
I've got to say, what are we not talking about? You can't say that and not expect that question.
Well, we don't know, but so when we make these predictions about the future, we're going to be wrong because the human mind is not wide enough to predict the crazy thing that's out there. Heck, most people aren't even predicting seasteading is going to happen. But if I were to set up what I'm afraid of and what I'm hopeful for, you say 50 years from now?
Yeah.
So I think we have a choice. 50 years from now, total surveillance, state-controlled, money-controlled, social credit system, global. Or we start proliferating superior examples on the ocean, and our grandchildren are living in a world where they can't imagine why they would argue about state politics, because it's like they're on cruise ships. It's like things just keep getting better. And they just take that for granted, and they're looking back at history the way we look back at wars. Like, why were they fighting over that? It doesn't make sense. They're going to say, look, why were they arguing over politicians? Why were our grandparents doing that? It's so primitive.
Can there be both? Could you see a future of both? Both the surveillance state and, is it a bifurcated world?
I think there could be both. I think if you have a complete surveillance state, maybe seasteading won't help. I think I think the thing I fear most is the governments all getting together and saying, we're declaring the whole ocean our territory because we're going to save the ocean because of environmentalism and climate change. We need complete power.
Well, they've done that with the Antarctic, haven't they? And space. They did that in the 60s with space, I think. No one can own a bit of space, apparently, according to the United Nations. Even if you're the one that goes out there and spends all the money to get up there and find a place and build a civilization, it apparently belongs to the people back here.
Yeah, but if you're actually on Mars, I think you can redefine what owning means.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, can you do that at the sea? That's the question.
I hope so. But I think seasteads have to win the hearts and minds of humanity the way that Singapore won the hearts and minds of people all over the world. No one cared about Singapore until they became successful, very humane, successful society. I spent a lot of time there. It's a pretty amazing place.
Okay, so last question then. How do we win the hearts and minds of the general population for the notion of living free at sea?
The way cruise ships have, slowly scale up and get people interested. I always point out people step off land onto a cruise ship and they don't change their ideology, even though they're choosing to vacation in private governance at sea. They don't say it's that way. They just say, it's this awesome ship and I get to eat and drink all I want and ride the water slides. Same thing when they go to Disney World. So we want to win not by convincing people through arguments, but by simply providing better choices.
Criticized by creation, as you said on our film last year.
Criticized by creation.
That really stuck with me, actually. That we used that as a soundbite on the film we made about Liberty in Our Lifetime last year. And you said it. I'd never heard it before.
It's attributed to Michelangelo.
Is that right?
Yeah. I should have said that. I hope I didn't make...
No, it didn't matter. I just never heard it before. I think it's a really perfect way of describing the system of opting into something new. And, yeah.
Yeah. Stop arguing, start seasteading.
Okay.
That's what we say.
Well, Joe, we didn't argue even, but I'm definitely on board, that's a pun in itself, isn't it? I didn't even mean that, but...
I'm stealing it, though.
Surely you've heard that one before. I said, I spoke to Mason yesterday and I said I came up with vote with your boat. And you told me yesterday, no, we've already got that one.
Well,
he said, he put it in his talk and he said he'd never heard of it before.
Well, it's good that you thought of it because I think a video was made 14 years ago called Vote with Your Boat about seasteading. And then we lost that phrase and then you brought it back. So now Mason is using it.
Well, yeah, he put it in his talk. But I thought I'd invented it. But there is nothing new in this world, is there? Everything's been thought of before, kind of, Anyway, thanks, Joe. Loved this conversation, and I'm super interested in how it all evolves now. I really am on board. I think it's mainly because the Free Cities idea, it really is happening on the sea already. Like you say, on cruise ships, it's actually happening. And everyone's obsessing over doing it on land and struggling for working examples. But there is a kind of pretty much a working prototype already happening on and people, like you say, don't even know it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like what we're after in a way.
Yeah. The proof of concept is flourishing on the sea for many decades now.
Yeah. And thanks for sort of bringing that to my attention, because it's a big part of my Free Cities journey to acknowledge that, and I'm surprised that I didn't spot it myself.
Yeah,
but it's really useful.
Yeah, and I think our movement needs to confront the fact that we don't want oases of freedom. They're not going to last. We want to completely outcompete the state and put it out of business and give people alternatives as quickly as possible.
Yeah, hallelujah. Well, good luck with everything, and thanks for coming on, Joe. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you for inviting me.